To have you all here and folks online for our first social transformation lunch of this fall term. We will be having our lunch in November. Will be 1 week after Election Day. I have no idea what will be happening. Dr. Rob Stevelco and I will be facilitating a conversation about whatever it is that is actually happening. So we invite you to come back on that date and reflect on what will surely be momentous happenings that we don't yet. But today we're really excited to welcome Jerry Gale to be with us from Christians Against Christian Nationalism Minnesota chapter. And this is such a critical topic, both around the election, the state of our democracy, and really the state of and the soul of Christianity at this time as well. So welcome, Jerry. We're delighted to have you. I'm going to turn it over to you for.
Great. I will just get started here. A nice ability to be able to sit and give this presentation. So I'll start out by saying that Christians Against Christian Nationalism was started in 2019 as an initiative of the Baptist Joint Committee on Religious Liberty. BJC was started in 1936, and it is a faith-based advocacy organization headquartered in DC, which focuses on upholding the historic Baptist principle of religious liberty. And I can add here that back in the 1930s, the Baptists were kind of looked on with some suspicion by the Methodists and Presbyterians. So back then in the 30s, they made sure they were in support of religious liberty. The website was started in 2019, and at that website there is a statement. And the Christians Against Christian Nationalism statement, I would encourage you to go there and sign the statement. There's over 1,400 Minnesotans that have signed that statement. I'm sure it's probably more by now. The last time I checked it. And I had talked to the people at BJC for a couple of years, and had been talking to them about you should be getting maybe organized on a state level. And it was explained to me that BJC is running an advocacy group. They are making presentations and testifying, but they really haven't gotten into any type of grassroots or statewide organizing. And so when I met with them, they were like, okay, give it a try. And I'll just state that in January of this year, we had the first meeting at Hennepin Church, Hennepin Avenue United Methodist Church, where I'm a member. And BJC had sent out an invitation to all their contacts in the metro area. And then I had sent an invitation out to a number of different lists. And I was hoping to have about 25 people show up. And over 100 people showed up. And that was kind of an indication of the interest out there. And what this group that we are building here, the major objective is to improve the communication coordination among individuals and churches who are concerned about Christian nationalism. A year ago, if you were a Methodist in Minnetonka worried about Christian nationalism, you didn't know there were Lutherans in Stillwater. And so this is a way for just to gather the troops together and work for each other. So what is Christian nationalism? Christian nationalism is a political ideology and a cultural framework that seeks to merge American and Christian identity. It suggests that real Americans are Christians and true Christians hold a particular set of political beliefs. Christian nationalism demands Christianity be privileged by the state, and it implies that to be a good American, one must be Christian. It often overlaps with and provides cover for white supremacy and racial injustice. And this is a quote from a book called The Flag and the Cross, and I'll just go ahead and read this. This is kind of the basic belief of Christian nationalism. That America was founded as a Christian nation by white men who were traditional Christians, who based the nation's founding documents on Christian principles. The United States is blessed by God, which is why it has been so successful, and that the nation has a special role to play in God's plan for humanity. These blessings are threatened by cultural degradation from un-American influences both inside and outside our borders. And that's kind of what we're building. That's the foundation we're building. So Christian nationalism threatens American democracy by distorting Americans' promise of religious freedom for all, and distorts Christianity by taking its central message, a gospel of love and service, and turning it into a false idol of power and male domination. Another way to say that is Christian nationalism is a threat to democracy and to Christianity. We must speak out against Christian nationalism, especially when it inspires acts of violence and intimidation, such as on January 6th. And you have to give some praise to BJC for setting up the Christian Sectors Against Christian Nationalism in 2019, and then a year and a half later, January 6th happens, and people are saying, oh, what is Christian nationalism? And they, do a little Google search like I did, and you find them. So now I'm going to give a little bit more information about Christian nationalism. The BRRI and Rookie put out a survey in 2023. Give a little bit more understanding of Christian nationalism. They did a survey where they asked people if they agreed with 5 statements. God has called Christians to exercise dominion over all areas of American society. The U.S. government should declare America a Christian nation. Being Christian is an important part of truly being American. If the U.S. moves away from our Christian foundations, we will not have a country. U.S. laws should be based on Christian values. Based upon the answers to those questions, they divided the country up into 4 categories: adherents, sympathizers, skeptics, and rejectors. Can you read that? Yeah. Adherents, sympathizers, skeptics, and rejectors. Obviously, adherents are true believers. Sympathizers are, kind of supportive. Skeptics are doubtful about them, and rejectors just reject it. What they found was, as a country, 10% of us are adherents, and sympathizers are 19%. Skeptics are 39%, and rejectors are 29%. And this is from 2020. And they found, they did some other, if you go find that study, you'll find some other conclusions. But I've really found this interesting, the Christian nationalism by religious attendance. As you can imagine, the people that attend once a week or more, you find more adherents and sympathizers. But people who seldom or never attend services still identify 5% of those people are adherents and 13% are sympathizers. And if you never attend church, it's hard to consider you to be Christian, right? So Christian nationalism is more of a heritage than a theology. Just like a Jewish person does not need to attend a synagogue to be considered a Jew. On the University of New York. So this year, PRI came out with another survey that looked by state. And in Minnesota, 28% of Minnesotans are adherents or sympathizers. North Dakota, 50%. Oh, wow. And so you can take a look here. So then they took a look at by Republicans, Independents, and Democrats. So 53% of Minnesota Republicans are adherents or sympathizers. 23% of Minnesota independents are, and 10% of Democrats are. For information. So now we're going to talk about the new apostolic reformation. Who has heard this term? Good. When I did this presentation up in Fergus Falls, like one person raised their hand out of 30. So I think there's been a lot more discussion about Christian nationalism than the new apostolic reformation. But I think the new apostolic reformation is really the engine, the energy behind Christian nationalism. And I'll explain that a little bit more as we go. So C. Peter Wagner is the person that really adopted the term New Apostolic Reformation. In the 1990s, he became fixated on this independent charismatic network. He thought it was going to be the center of the future growth of the church. So in 1996, he adopted that term. It's based upon a couple of verses. In Ephesians, it goes, God gave us some apostles and some prophets, some evangelists and some pastors and teachers. And C. Peter Wagner said, well, we've got evangelists and we've got pastors and teachers. So we need more apostles and prophets. And that led to the apostolic and prophetic governance of the church, which then led to the Seven Mountain Mandate and the strategic spiritual warfare. I'm going to talk about each of these. So another question, who here has heard the Seven Mountain Mandate? Who has not heard the Seven Mountain Mandate?
I can't remember it.
Wow. Okay. So apostles primarily governed the church, being advised supernaturally through prophets. And prophets cannot self-proclaim. They need to be recognized by the Ego Vision Apostolic Team. And so if you look at that little picture, image there, this is just kind of how all these people are kind of connected and related. But what we have these global networks, and they reach across into all the different types of countries. And there's thousands of global apostles and prophets, but they don't really compete against each other. We're going to take an example here. See, Sean Chi-an. So he's a pastor at Harvest Church in Pasadena. He leads the Harvest International Ministry. He's a chancellor at Wagner University. This is his quote from January 6th. I believe that this week we're going to throw Jezebel out and Jehu's going to rise up. We're going to rule and reign through President Trump under the lordship of Jesus Christ. He was one of the leading speakers at the January 6th insurrection. Now, what is disturbing is Harvard's International Ministry has like 25,000 speakers in 65 countries. Now, these churches may be 5 or 6 people. It is a global network. And there's many international ministries like this. So then, Lance Walnu developed the Seven Mountain Mandate, and it's and then C. Peter Wagner adopted that and brought it into his movement. The Seven Mountains are religion, family, education, media, government, business, arts. And you have to think about this. The way they think about it is each country has these seven mountains. And so, right now, they believe that there are a hierarchy of demons who are at the top controlling these mountains. And Christians are mandated to conquer each of the seven mountains, install kingdom-minded and kingdom-motivated individuals at the top of each mountain. So this is going to be a top-down Christian influence. You know, once they have control of the top, they're gonna have control of the whole country, so not gonna be any separation of church and state. So is this something we should be concerned about in Minnesota?
Yeah.
So I went to the National Day of Prayer in St. Paul this year. And this is a picture of the pamphlet that was handed out there.
Wow.
And so let's see what they're gonna do. This was their agenda that day. They talk about the progress they're making in the church, the family, education, business, military, government, arts, which is 7. And this is a pamphlet that was used across the country for the National Day of Prayer. And so this is essentially the people who are organizing the National Day of Prayer have just adopted the 7 Mountain framework. So then, probably, to me, the most discouraging thing here is the strategic warfare. And they're not hiding this. This is really what they believe, that we have this spiritual warfare going on. And they lean into a couple of quotes here, a couple of verses from Ephesians. Put on the whole armor of God, that ye may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. And so you have to, take on the shield of faith and the helmet of salvation, the sword of the Spirit. And then this other verse from Matthew. Since the days of John the Baptist have come now, the kingdom of heaven suffers violence, and the violent takes it by force. I will come back to that verse in a little bit later. Oops. So what that means is the prophets and the apostles are the generals in the fight against the demonic forces, and they talk a lot about demons. When if you get around people that are going to be talking about the 7 Mountain Mandate, they're going to be talking about demons. So on the day before January 6th, the Christian Nationalists gathered together and they marched around the Capitol in a Jericho march, and there were people there blowing shofars. And so that led to the storming the Capitol. But this other fact, the thing that it just kind of, I come back to it because it's just so damning, is that the Christian nationalism claimed that the attack on Nancy Pelosi's husband was justified because she's a demon. So just to bring this up to today, Lance Wallnew, who we already mentioned, said that Harris represents the spirit of Jezebel in a way that is even much more ominous than Hillary, because she'll bring a racial component and she's younger. Biden's out, like we prophesied. Kamala's in. My guess is that the devil's plan is to make her president. And we've heard the term Jezebel twice now. So for the right-wing Christians, a Jezebel is a barely human being hell-bent on seducing men and assuming their power. There we go.
Amen.
Jezebel's name.
Jerry, there's actually written this morning by Brian Gale, a Missouri word on the Jezebel spirit
Oh,
and how it's being morphed
yes.
right now.
So,
Brian Gale.
There's a racist component to this.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. I moved to pause here on the presentation. Lance Wallnew right now is traveling to all the swing states with a courage tour. And he's going to each swing state and sets up a 3-day revival. And tens of thousands of people are coming to this. And during this revival, there's a lot of talk about God wants Trump to be president. Not a lot of talk about the Beatitudes or the Good Samaritan. But it's a very powerful force that's out there. So how do we respond? How do we fight back? So there's two foundations for responding and fighting back, theological and secular. It's important for us to know both, and it's also important for us to be working together. As far as the organizations that are fighting against Christian nationalism based upon faith, as far as the Christians include the Baptist Joint Committee, Faithful America, and the Poor People's Campaign. I would encourage everybody to go to Faithful America. They are very active in this, and unlike Baptist Joint Committee, which is a C3 organization, Faithful America is a C4, so they can come out against Trump. They can come out against politicians, and they are out there doing that. And then also the Interfaith organization, Interfaith Alliance is just a great website to go to and see what they're doing. The title says it's the same thing. As far as the foundation responding to Christian nationalism, the organizations that are fighting against it on a secular basis, based upon the separation of church and state, ACLU, Americans United for the Separation of Church and State, and Freedom from Religion. I went to the Americans United event last April and found that about half the people there were people of faith and half were secular. But they all were working towards this goal of fighting Christian nationalism. This is probably the most important thing I can say to you. The fight against Christian nationalism, to be successful, it must be led by Christians so that it is not seen as anti-Christian. And that is why I'm giving this presentation. Because we want to be leading this. And then just, kind of, where's my book? This is a book by Jim Wallace.
Yep.
He relies on scripture to base his fight against Christian nationalism. But this is just like, to me, these are things like love your neighbor, the Good Samaritan. I've described myself for a long time as a Matthew 25 Christian. I was hungry, you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger and you invited me in. And I needed clothes, and you clothed me. So, and then the secular foundation, the First Amendment, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. The First Amendment was based upon the Virginia Statute of Religious Freedom, which was written by Thomas Jefferson and adopted on January 16, 1786. So what can we do? First, we have to recognize that Christian nationalism has been out there for decades building this movement. And it will take years for us to respond. So there's no magic bullet, but we just have to do this. Read and support the organizations that I've listed above. Talk to friends. As I have given this presentation after the end, when there's a Q&A, which never is a Q&A, it's a discussion group. The biggest frustration I hear is, I've got a cousin, I've got a relative, and they are, I can't talk to them. I can't reason with them. Every time I start talking, they start saying I've got a demon inside of me.
Yep.
But we gotta try it.
Yep.
Ask your pastor to preach against Christian nationalism, or if you're a preacher, preach against Christian nationalism. I was in Fergus Falls last week, which is 2 hours away from here. The minister came up to me afterwards and said, I can't do that here. I can speak about it, but I can't speak against Christian nationalism because I'll probably lose my job if I do. So, but if you're in Minneapolis here, my preacher my minister at Hennepin Avenue United Methodist Church has mentioned it several times. There's a Facebook group. There's two Facebook groups, one for the national organization and then one for us, Christians Against Christian Nationalism. I encourage you, Minnesota, encourage you to go take a look and join there. Ask your politicians about it and vote. And then, I think the best advice I can do as far as what we can be doing is book study groups. You know, if you want to, have a secular, if you, just your neighborhoods are getting together talking, here's 4, books that are, these are kind of really the basic, most, important books in this. Now, there's like probably 20 or 30 books out there now about Christian nationalism. These 4 are good. And then, I've talked about this book. Jim Wallace came to town in June and spoke at Hennepin Church. I've talked to several other churches that have done a book study group on this. And this book is great because it's 8 chapters. So you can take 2 chapters a week, 4 a week, have a nice little step group. And he does base his fight based upon what's in the Bible. Now, Amanda Tyler, How to End Christian Nationalism, her book is coming out on October 22nd. She's coming to Minneapolis on November 11th. And we'll be at Hennepin Church, which I'm very pleased about. And we'll be talking about her book, and you'll be getting an invitation from me with the way to register. So I'll get that to you soon. And then Angela Denker is a Lutheran minister here in the Twin Cities, who's becoming highly visible in this campaign. She's making presentations not only in Minnesota, but around the country. And she has a book coming out in March that looks at the radicalization of American boyhood. And I think it will be a very, very timely book. Yeah. And then another way to encourage people to invite me to their church. And Rolf Olson is here in town. He's been giving a presentation about Christian nationalism for a couple of years. And he has mainly been going to the Lutheran churches because he's a retired Lutheran minister. But he does a really nice job too. And finally, there's 2 movies out there, God and Country, that was directed by Dan Partland and produced by Rob Reiner. It's based upon the book, The Power of Worshippers. And then Bad Faith is a book that looks at the shadow network of money, media, and its secret hub of the alt-right. Both these are very helpful. So so that's kind of so I'm going to I'm going to switch to another presentation if that's okay. And so just last night, I had a Zoom meeting for the Minnesota Christians Against Christian Nationalism Minnesota. We had about 40 people on the call. I just want to share a couple things with you. So these are the presentations I've done. By the way, oh wait, is it? Hang on. Yeah, I'm doing that, yeah.
And you?
Okay, let me share again. We're going. So these presentations, notice I put United Theological Seminary, New Brighton. Raffle, and there was some workshops that were done in St. Paul, and Ralph Olson has been making presentations, and Reverend Angela Dinker too. This is what I wanted to bring up. Matthew D. Taylor, he's a scholar at the Institute for Islamic and Christian Jewish Studies. This book is just out. And if you look at that title, The Violent Take It by Force, that came from that.
Yep.
And this is a book that is about the new apostolic reformation. He has been getting interviewed quite a bit. He's out there circulating around. So
This is where J.D. Vance kind of pivoted around during
Yeah.
the debate as to who he was quoting.
Then this is kind of upcoming. I mentioned meditator, and then on January 19th at the First Unitarian Society, the Humanists of Minnesota organized this day to recognize the National Religious Freedom Day, and which is the day that the Virginia statute was signed. And then Rachel Lasher from Americans United is coming to town to speak on that day. And so that's something that us Christians need to support too. So I think that's it. So at this point, I'll take questions, but I'd be more interested in hearing comments. Yes,
Have you heard of Pamela Cooper White's book,
I don't think so.
The Psychology of Christian
Yeah.
Nationalism?
That part I have heard.
Why
Yes.
people are drawn in and how to talk across the divide.
Yes.
We're doing a discussion at Holy Trinity Lutheran on October 17th based on that book. So our church is starting to address this along with Christian Zionism on the 28th of October.
Okay. Could you send me those dates?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, one of the people that I know pretty well in this really recommended that book as something that really gave her a lot of insight of what we're dealing with. So, and oh, what else?
There was a Zoom a while back, and one of the things that I can't remember which theologian talked about is that white Christian nationalists don't talk about Christ. And part of, in terms of the empowerment and how to respond. So, for example, I'm currently in an interim position at a church that surely didn't look like it was gonna look, because I met the leading pastor in the Justice Scripture study group. Many people are right in this, so I was just stunned to find out where I'm preaching. And what came even before I knew that was to focus on a psalm and focus on the gospel. And after that Zoom about white nationalism, I'm not using that word in the pulpit, but I'm talking about who and how Jesus is in the world. And, you know, Matthew 25, that whole, so that kind of concepts. And then one of the things I found helpful, I live in a 55 class place and when people find out I'm a Christian and I'm in the seminary, they assume I'm a Christian like them. Yeah. So I'm having fun, And so the question that, is this conversation that all of a sudden turns somebody around? No, but it stops them in the trio. So I say to them, what are the 5 most important parts of your values of being a Christian? And then I'll say, how does Trump embody those values? Which of course he doesn't. Whether it's personally or attending church or just whatever they say. And so that, I know I leave with a lot more serenity in my spirit, just asking that question. Because once this isn't gonna move. So just, that question has been helpful, so
Yeah, that's
look that up for people. And this was so helpful because it feels like things are moving so fast. And to just pause and step back and have this overview, it just feels like I'm catching my breath in this work, so thank you.
I think I mentioned this at the beginning. The most common concern I hear from people is when they can't talk to a relative. And I've listened to a number of conversations. There's really no good way to do that. I mean, if you can just continue to talk and and share information, you share, he shares, the other person shares, but it's it's a difficult thing. The other kind of frustrating concern that I have and people who are involved in this is that we're kind of building something here in Minnesota, but we're not quite sure what we're building to get to. I mean, I think one of the things that has been brought up is we're building kind of an insurance policy where if there's a big Christian nationalism gathering here in Minneapolis, we can gather people to go there and protest against it, something like that. I think it's important because it doesn't give us a way to communicate and cooperate, but and the other thing that I need to do next year is to go out to greater Minnesota more and, go down to Rochester, Spicer and have this presentation there, so.
I'll share that my final capstone paper used a lot of these facts and I was arguing for the way that the Eucharist combats Christian nationalism, in that it's oriented toward life and like all that it talks about, and to sort of pull on Christian theology and sacrament to say, if you're a Christian, like, let's talk about Christian sacraments and values. And then, I don't know, I feel like that's kind of the strategy I was using to push against, the death-oriented sort of view of that I see.
Wow.
Wow, yeah.
So, so you're talking about, it would be a good idea to share communion with people, and that would be.
Well, a lot of my work previously, decades of work in the food sovereignty movement. So when I came to seminary, I started to put the pieces together of how food sovereignty, so like sustainable food, regenerative food systems, supporting emerging farmers, supporting, BIPOC farmers, queer farmers, all of that stuff is within the vision of food sovereignty. And so it's like, how is our food system ecologically sound? How is it culturally appropriate? And then I was like, oh, well, when I'm listening to scholars talk about Eucharist, it's actually really similar tenets, but the way that we've embodied Eucharist in our country hasn't been actualized because of systems of oppression. So food sovereignty is very global. It's a global movement for all those things, and that I think they're able to articulate all of that, their goals for the movement, so that we can sort of see where we've been off. Does that make sense? I don't know how to exactly say it, but
Let me ask you a question from some of the experts up here in the front of the table.
To your right, to my left.
Say you have a non-denominational kind of fundamental Christian national church. Do they do communion, or is that just something that gets lost in the process?
Of course they do.
Oh,
Yes, and they don't let anybody take it with them who doesn't believe just like they do. They so-called, it's called fencing the table. That's old language for deciding who can participate in communion and who cannot. If you're not a member, some churches, if you're not a member of that particular gathered community, you're not welcome. To Eucharist.
Okay.
And they're all shades of that.
yeah, and so a lot of my work has been how we've sort of gotten into a very small symbolic form of Eucharist instead of it being a way of life, which I think it was intended to be. A fellowship, a culture of fellowship, a culture of sharing meal as sacred. And so, there's the ritual aspect that we engage in, but how are we actually engaging in the sacrament of that in our whole lives and in our whole system?
Well, when the church got started, the communion was like after part of a meal. I mean, it was like, we're all gathered together, we're sharing a meal, then we're gonna, have communion, the breaking of bread. Even for a layperson, I pick these things up along the way. That's the other thing when I'm out making this presentation. Somebody might ask a pretty theological question, and I'm like, I'm just a layperson.
That's smart.
Yeah, get out of it. Although somebody, I said that one time, and afterwards somebody came and said, just don't say you're just a
Yeah,
layperson.
just
Don't
don't say that.
Yeah.
Jerry, have you been able to trace any connections between the Christian Nationalist Movement and Project 25?
I think it's out there. I haven't looked into it, but from the little bit I've read, it seems like there is a connection. Yeah.
Heritage Foundation.
Yeah.
Yep,
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
So it seems important to draw connections with, the network, the kind of complex network of ultranationalism, the far right that's emerging, that sometimes has Christianity as kind of an ideological justification, but other times doesn't. And I wonder about what the organization is doing to sort of see beyond just the people that call themselves Christian nationalists, and to sort of see how they operate within the kind of ecosystem that is the far right, both within the US, but then also globally, in terms of, white supremacist networks and
Yeah, I think the second movie I talked about, the Power Brokers, no, is that what it was? That book is looking at the financial structure behind, white supremacy and the far right and then the Christian nationalism. There's this funding that's going on out there.
Yeah.
That's pretty powerful. So
yeah, that's part of the attack against critical race theory. It's the attack against LGBTQ people, education, book banning. It's just, how to kind of draw those connections so that we can have a sense about, where's the money coming from and how is it being, what's the strategy? I don't know.
I also find really terrifying, this idea that like people can be named as demons as a justification for violence. That's part and parcel of this whole naming people as non-human, which is such a precursor of violence and extremism. And so, if you're fighting a demon, not a human being, it becomes so much easier to. And I think that's part of. Yeah, and I mean, even the eating cats and dogs, as a way of naming these people are not civilized humans like we are civilized humans kind of trope. That's the part that really, because there's such strong correlation between those attitudes and murderous violence.
There's,
across the world.
There seems like the reemergence of racial science as well. I heard Trump yesterday talk about the criminal immigrants who, and he says it's in the genes.
Yes.
Have you heard that? But I mean, that's
I
genesis.
think that was a new thing just like yesterday.
Yeah.
He
Added
it to his
But that kind of, that's active in, their racial science, unfortunately, is still operating in science as well. And so we have to, there are all these different fronts, I guess, that kind of work in complex ways together.
One of the things with the cats and dogs, which is not getting much press, the white people in Springfield are supporting the Haitian businesses, like it's standing room only and there's lines. And I think part of as we're in this movement fighting this just horrific presence, listening for those resistance, which oftentimes I must admit feel like a whisper against it all. And yet those whispers are what keep equipping us and inspiring us to find, you know, where our feet are in this moment. How can we continue to be resisting? And that story, the first time I saw this restaurant, every table full and this long line out, I just said, "Ooh." So those kind of stories are so important to hold and to share as well.
Well, so that we don't demonize people as well, and, you know, looking at the Christian nationalists, I mean, they're caught up in an ideology, right? It's, in some ways, they have to become free from that ideology, but we don't want to demonize them as human beings.
Yeah, I have
Yeah, we just do it
to,
right back at
I
them.
have to be careful what I say. I got my hand slapped by Holly about, you know, we're a C3 organization, Christians Against Christian Nationalism, so I can't, you know, I'm not supposed to write comment on political candidates, but I know who I want to win. No. And it is, I think it is two sides of the coin that we can talk about the threat to Christianity from Christian nationalism and the theology behind that. But then we get into the threat to democracy and the politics of it. It's really hard to separate it because I think they're really connected.
I think theological education is more
Yes.
important than
Right,
ever
yeah.
before, in terms of informed biblical studies.
Yes.
This stuff is bizarro. It is leaping over centuries of interpretive tradition. I mean, it's just pure silliness, what has been stacked up together with some sort of a biblical warrant for that. It's just nuts. And that people who don't have any kind of critical engagement with text would swallow this junk is just horrifying.
And now you have Elon Musk and Russell Brand and these kind of celebrity figures, you know. Elon Musk with X or Twitter, I mean, it's like all these algorithms that are pitching this stuff to people.
Yep,
They open
yep.
their phones and they see.
Yep.
You know, so it's.
Into the nationalism isn't new, nor is Christian nationalism.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the sort of sweep of Christian nationalism in the 19th century. When, if I were talking to a Christian that I thought would be reasonably conversational and open conversation about this, people in here may not be surprised. I might invoke Soren Kierkegaard. Because he had some very insightful things to say about Christian nationalism in Denmark, these kind of quotes. If I'm Danish, I'm a Christian. If I'm a Christian, I'm Danish. And this sort of melding of identities that, you know, what he would encourage us Christians, people who would assume they're Christians, to do is think about what is a Christian in the context of identity and practices and who is Jesus, and kind of back to that. Let's investigate the person of Jesus and what he actually said and did. And then what is a follower of Jesus? And then how is that differentiated from kind of political and social identity? But that would take a long time.
But Bonhoeffer too, you know, they're.
Well,
sorry.
yeah, I was just gonna mention that, John Matthews. John Matthews is a Dietrich Bonhoeffer scholar. He's a retired Lutheran minister. And he has a presentation about looking at Germany in the 30s and what was happening to what's happening now. And the parallels are disturbing. And it's, I think, you know, the Nazis were a Christian-based organization. And they had this leader they thought was, you know, God ordained, and that sounds familiar with what's going on now, so.
I just finished reading Letters from the End of the World, which is the first written account of after the bombing of Hiroshima by a survivor who's a university professor. And it's, at the end of the book, there's this really staggering thing in which he talks about following national, like we should have known that following nationalism blindly was wrong. And, and that perhaps dropping the bomb was the only way to punish us for our hubris and following this nationalism. It was really startling to me reading this book, but
Wow.
and not that I agree with that kind of solution, but that's his eyewitness experience. But just thinking about like the kind of taking responsibility for the fact that people follow this nationalist line and that we should know better as a sort of moral principle was very startling in a way that was really like the people have to take responsibility for the things that they're allowing the leaders to do in their names.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a violation of the first commandment. It's idolatry, right?
I think too, you know, what's our strategy when, you know, people are, you know, their emotions are being played with. I feel like this is like psychologically confusing and manipulative to people, you know, what they're being told to believe. And that it is meant to like keep dividing you. And I feel like part of the strategy I think I've taken or I'm trying to take is to create something different that is an experience of connection, and then inviting people into that so they can see and feel and experience an alternative. But that also means like inviting those people in your life that claim those ideas, right? And so I think we have to have a willingness in our own hearts to invite people into something different and to belong to them in that way.
Yeah, because people are seeking belonging and they're fearful.
Yeah. Very afraid.
Yes, at the very base of Christian nationalism is a fear of losing their power, fear of losing their privileged position in the country, and you know fear of economic security. That's you know that's really is where it's coming out of. So.
I think Bridget's point's good about an alternative, you know, like what's on offer. If it's not that, then what? You know, because people will find a place to belong where they're accepted and they're affirmed and their fears are, you know, someone's responding to their fears, they can then mobilize around, you know, this stuff. So it's like what, you know, what our church is offering by way of an alternative is a really good question.
I want to go back to communion for everybody. I know at our Methodist church, Young Grace Welcome, is that the case for most denominations? For the Catholics, you have to be Catholic.
Yeah, not a Mennonite church tends to be a bit more closed, but
Okay.
Depending on the congregation, that's right.
The LCA is
Okay.
UCC is extravagantly
What? Yeah.
The Episcopal Church, well, I did not grow up Episcopalian, but I'm in with them now. But when I first started attending Episcopal Church, as an unbaptized person, it was made clear to me that only baptized Christians are invited to partake in communion. And so I'm like sitting in the pew all by myself while everyone else is sharing in this communal activity, and it was horrible. Left that church. Found another one. I mean, so there's a spectrum in the Episcopal world. So I don't know if people still say that or if it's canon anymore to require that division. But
Our tradition's like the inverse, so if you're a Christian nationalist, you can't take communion. Because to be baptized, you have to renounce any adherence to nation state, like a nation state. So that, I know it sounds funny, but that kind of is our confession. So it's not, I don't know, depending on the church. I wouldn't say that majority are closed, but there's this idea, I think, that believer's baptism means that you've made a commitment and that matters. And if you haven't made that commitment, it's not that you're not welcome, but you aren't welcome.
And
At some level, or you
Yeah.
respect that difference. Sorry, Mom.
there are Catholic communities that will press the boundary of canon law. on that.
St. John.
Yeah, out of St. John's, out of St.
Oh, yeah.
John's, when I asked as a Protestant, could I participate in communion here? And they said, it would be a greater sin for us to refuse you than for you to present yourself.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I thought, oh, I
That's
like
very
that. Casuistry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would imagine St. John of Arc might be the boundaries of that.
Yeah.
Well, I belong to a Catholic church that is inclusive of all, like has an open communion.
Oh,
Yeah,
Yeah.
we're an ecumenical Catholic community in
Okay.
Eden Prairie. But I also want to press like thinking about communion as beyond the ritual,
Yeah.
because I think
Yeah.
that's what it's all about. Is like, we're all eaters, we all eat food. So like, we all participate in communion of some kind every day. And if we're not thinking about where the food came from, we're not thinking about our relationship to land or our relationship to how we're participating in a culture of sharing sacredness of the land with each other. And so that's a lot of the work that I do, is like expanding our idea of what communion is in our full lives beyond the ritual.
So,
you're done?
There's someone on,
Okay.
Anne online would like to say something.
Oh, good. I'm sorry about that.
Yeah. Well, thank you for everybody.
There's somebody online who wants to ask a question.
Oh,
Hey, I just wanted to note, hi, my name is Ann Woods. I'm sorry I couldn't follow the conversation very well, so if this is a little bit abrupt, I apologize for that. I was just noting, I myself am an academic working in the field of environmental ethics, and I'm just really struck by the parallels between conversations around Christian nationalism and conversations around climate change. And I wanted to note that some of the folks, and I particularly I think of Catherine Hayhoe, who is an evangelical climate scientist. And so she frequently, apparently, is at family gatherings with an uncle who just is completely dismissive that she's wrong. Never mind that she has, a PhD in climate science. And she has put together some resources on how to have those conversations and sort of how to break down who it's possible to have those conversations with and who it isn't. She has some sources. And so I just wanted to point people in that direction, should that be helpful.
can we get right down that name?
What was that?
Yeah, Catherine Cahill.
Oh,
Hayhoe, Catherine Hayhoe. Yeah. Or you might also look for the Evangelical Environmental Network, EEN. She's involved in that. So if you can remember that more easily and look it up, it'll connect through. But she has a website, and under the FAQs, it's how to have these conversations.
K-A-Y.
HAYHOE, Hayhoe.
Oh, okay.
So thank you all for being here. We're near the end of our time. I did want to mention, we do have a resource that we developed about values looking at the election that's nonpartisan, that's sort of along the lines of what Mimi was sharing. So if folks want, we have three of these left, so. If anybody wants to have one.
And as we're breaking up here, I would just like to mention that I was on a call this morning with a local group that has been organizing, started around Ceasefire Choir, and is now organizing Minnesota Christians for Free Palestine. So I'm interested in the intersections and the parallels here with that group. And what begs the question is to call out religious nationalism. It's an easier way to start a conversation with someone who's in that Christian camp. And it also is a way to point to other places where there is genocide being practiced currently because of religious nationalism.
India is going through this. Yeah,
That's not what I was talking about.
Yeah, but it's, they have nationalism over there, I think it's Hindu How they-
Yeah,
Right,
the
it's that one's
internationals,
Hindu and Saudi too. Wahhabism was put in place by the Brits when they withdrew because they knew they'd be able to control that royal family and it's become national religion. Something I just learned recently is like, we gotta look at all of those
Yeah.
if we wanna make the world, the place that we want it to be.
Mhm. And that intentionality from early on of the teachings, that this rooting in the hate and the nationalism are just incredibly frightening, and to remember that when they look at a little one, they don't know this stuff, and that over time, that sense of learning, and then also remembering my story in terms of growing up in a conservative Republican town, that we still were neighbors to each other, even if we didn't agree on stuff. But to remember that teaching is so important. It's challenging.
40 acres.
And the 7 mountains, it's like I have 2 reactions to those. One, I feel so
So it's
overwhelmed
40
because that's
acres,
basically everything.
LCS.
But then I also
Okay.
feel like, where's your sphere of influence?